After my husband passed away, my daughter took control of our $30 million estate. She stood in the foyer that night, her arms folded like a gate across her chest, and said, "You're old, Mom. It's my turn now." I thought she was grieving, that maybe the pain had confused her judgment. But when I returned from the garden with the last bouquet I'd placed for Charles, I heard the sound no mother should ever hear. The soft metallic click of a lock sliding shut from the other side. The porch light burned behind the frosted glass, and her silhouette lingered for one heartbeat before fading into darkness. I tried the handle once, twice, then pressed my palm against the wood, as if love alone could open it. The house smelled faintly of lilac and old paper, the scent of a life built over 43 years. Now even the air refused to cross the threshold. If you've ever watched everything you built turn into a closed door, stay with me. This isn't just a story about loss. It's about how a single locked door can lead to another one opening, wider than you ever imagined. That night, rain began to fall. I stood beneath it without an umbrella, clutching my small brass key, the one Charles gave me the day we moved in. The teeth of that key had worn smooth, like a memory polished by decades of use. I slipped it into the lock out of habit. It turned halfway, then stopped. A tiny click echoed through the empty porch, final and cold. Somewhere beyond the walls, my daughter moved about our kitchen, the same kitchen where she once learned to bake cinnamon rolls on Saturday mornings. I could almost smell the sugar and butter, almost hear her laughter. Now, silence answered back. I whispered her name, hoping kindness might undo pride. "Emily, open the door, sweetheart. Let's talk." Her voice came through the wood, calm but sharp. "Go home, Mom. This is my turn." I swallowed hard. "This is my home." She didn't reply. The porch light flickered once, then went out. Water dripped from my sleeves as I stepped back onto the gravel path. Every stone felt unfamiliar under my shoes. My late husband used to say a house only stands when love holds the beams together. Tonight, the beams groaned with betrayal. I looked up at the dark windows and remembered the promise Charles left me before he died. Keep faith in paper and in the people you trust. At the time, I thought it was just one of his gentle reminders, something a man says when he knows his time is short. I never imagined those words would become a map. The driveway stretched ahead, gleaming like black glass. I carried nothing but my purse, my wedding ring, and a small tin of Shino tea leaves wrapped in cloth. They were meant for quiet evenings by the fireplace. Instead, they followed me into the night like relics from another life. My car sat alone beneath the oak tree, dotted with wet leaves. I opened the trunk and stared at the few boxes I'd managed to load. Earlier, photo albums, Charles's old fountain pen, a framed picture of Emily on her graduation day. In that photograph, she had her arm around my shoulder, her smile wide, her eyes filled with ambition. Somewhere along the way, ambition had learned to speak louder than affection. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The wipers brushed away streaks of rain, revealing the gate at the end of the drive. It creaked as it opened, then closed behind me with a hollow clang. In the rearview mirror, the house vanished into the storm. My reflection looked older than I remembered. Grief adds years where joy once lived. For a moment, I almost turned back. Maybe if I knocked again, she would see reason. Maybe love could negotiate with pride. But as the thunder rolled, I understood that some doors aren't meant to reopen. They're meant to teach you how to build new ones. I drove without direction, passing familiar streets turned strange by sorrow. Streetlights blurred into soft halos through the rain. I thought of Charles, of his steady voice reading the morning paper, of his habit of underlining phrases about integrity and justice. He always believed in evidence, in signatures, in the quiet certainty of the written word. And as the night stretched on, a faint hope stirred within me. Perhaps somewhere, in the world he left behind, proof of his faith waited to be found. By the time I reached the edge of town, the storm had softened to drizzle. I pulled over near a small motel, its neon sign humming with tired light. The air smelled of wet asphalt and distant sea salt. As I stepped out, I looked down at the key still in my hand. It was useless now, but I couldn't let it go. It wasn't just metal. It was memory, trust, and the echo of a promise. I whispered into the quiet night, "When you locked that door, Emily, you opened another one." The words drifted upward, mingling with the mist. Somewhere beyond the clouds, I hoped Charles was listening. I tucked the key into my coat pocket and walked toward the motel's flickering vacancy sign. The pavement gleamed beneath each step, reflecting a faint shimmer of dawn just beginning to break. Tomorrow I would gather myself. Tomorrow I would find Henry Wallace, the family attorney my husband trusted. And maybe then, behind some sealed document or forgotten clause, I would discover why Charles told me to keep faith in paper and in the people I trust. Morning arrived pale and uncertain, like a guest unsure if it should stay. I parked across the street from the house I had once called my own. Through the iron gate, I could see the roses Charles and I planted leaning beneath the weight of last night's rain. Their petals clung to the stems the way memories cling to time, softly, desperately, refusing to fall. I had come back because there were still things inside that carried my name, things I couldn't let strangers box up and toss away. A life cannot be measured in square footage or dollars, but in the quiet weight of the objects it shelters. Inside that house, every room had a pulse. When I stepped through the side entrance, Emily was waiting in the hallway. My daughter stood with her arms crossed, a silk blouse immaculate as ever, her expression rehearsed. "Let's make this quick, Mom," she said. "The moving company will be here in an hour." I nodded, unwilling to argue. "I just need a few personal items." She followed me as I moved from room to room. In the living room, I lifted the framed wedding photograph from the mantel. Charles's smile looked younger than the man I buried, full of unguarded faith. My fingers traced the edge of the frame, feeling the dust settle into the grooves. From the corner table, I took the Chino teacup, the one Charles gave me on our 20th anniversary. Its glaze shimmered like a faint memory of sunrise. I remembered how he used to say, "Patience is the steeping of the soul." I wrapped it carefully in a linen handkerchief and placed it in my suitcase. Behind me, Emily sighed. "Mom, you don't need to take all this clutter. We can buy you new things." Her tone was clipped, efficient, as if sentiment were a burden. I looked at her reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. The woman staring back at me had my eyes, but none of my warmth. "These aren't things, Emily. They're proof I was here." She shrugged. "I'm trying to make this easier. You'll thank me later." I met her gaze. Don't mistake comfort for kindness. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, uncertainty or perhaps guilt, but it vanished before I could name it. In the study, the air still carried the faint scent of Charles's aftershave. His desk remained as he left it. Neatly stacked papers, fountain pen resting beside an old ledger. On the top drawer, A brass label bore our initials intertwined. I opened it gently and found a small envelope addressed in his handwriting. To my Lillian, keep faith in paper and in the people you trust. The words pressed against my heart like a steady hand. I slipped the envelope into my purse, unaware that it was more than sentiment. It was direction. As I closed the drawer, Emily spoke from the doorway. Dad wanted me to handle things. You're not equipped for this kind of responsibility. I turned, meeting her calm superiority with silence. There are moments when speaking only feeds the fire. Instead, I picked up a small wooden box from the shelf. Inside lay a collection of family photographs, faded corners curling inward. One showed Emily as a child, her hair tangled by the wind, holding my hand at the beach. She was laughing then, wild and free, before ambition taught her to measure love by control. I placed the box in my suitcase and zipped it shut. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a line being drawn. At the doorway, Emily leaned against the frame. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I paused beside her, the suitcase heavy in my grip. You're mistaking weight for resistance. Some things are heavy because they matter. Her expression softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. You'll see I'm right one day. I stepped past her without reply. Outside, the morning light had brightened, catching on the wet bricks and turning them gold. I walked down the path slowly, memorizing each step, each breath, each sound of the garden. The roses bowed as I passed, and I wondered if they too felt abandoned. At the gate, I turned back one last time. The curtains fluttered in the upstairs window, Charles's old study. I imagined him there, reading his newspaper, nodding thoughtfully as he underlined another phrase about truth. I whispered a promise to the air. I'll keep faith, my love, in paper and in people. The gate creaked open. Gravel crunched under my shoes. I lifted the suitcase into the trunk of my car, the same car that had carried me away the night before. When I closed the door and started the engine, the reflection of the house shimmered in the rearview mirror. Familiar, distant, already fading. As I drove away, I realized the ache in my chest wasn't just loss. It was awakening. For the first time since Charles's death, I felt a quiet resolve growing in the hollow his absence left behind. Love, after all, doesn't end when doors close. It simply changes its address. The sign outside flickered a dull red, vacancy, its glow bleeding onto the cracked pavement. I parked beneath it, the rain now reduced to a mist that clung to the air like unspoken words. The motel stood tired and narrow, a row of doors that had seen too many stories end and too few begin. Inside, the clerk hardly looked up as I paid for a single night. The key dangled from a faded tag, the number written in marker, smudged by years of hands that had come and gone. I climbed the chipped concrete steps to room 6, its doorknob loose, paint peeling around the edges. When I turned the handle, it gave way too easily, as if expecting disappointment. The room smelled faintly of detergent and damp carpet. A single lamp cast a cone of yellow light over a table scarred with cigarette burns. I set my small suitcase beside the bed and sank onto the thin mattress. Springs creaked beneath me, a weak echo of comfort. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, something solid in a night that had stripped away everything else. From my purse, I took the Shino teacup and a packet of leaves. There was no kettle, only a styrofoam cup and a small coffee maker near the sink. I filled it with water, pressed the worn button, and waited as it sputtered to life. The first drop of steam rose like a sigh. I poured the hot water carefully and stirred the leaves. The scent, earthy, calm, familiar, filled the silence. I cupped the warm drink between my palms and stared at the reflection in the window. Outside, neon light pulsed against the rain-streaked glass. My face stared back, pale and weary, framed by streaks of silver hair I hadn't noticed before. Grief had carved fine lines along the edges of my mouth, reminders of words I'd held too long behind closed lips. When you lose your home, you don't just lose walls and ceilings. You lose the version of yourself who believed those walls were safe. Sitting there, I realized I had left more than furniture behind. I had left the woman who once thought love was enough to protect her. I reached for my wallet and unfolded a photograph I kept tucked behind my driver's license. It showed Charles at our anniversary dinner, his tie slightly crooked, his smile full of quiet mischief. I traced the crease down the middle, then closed my eyes. His voice came back to me, steady, thoughtful, always certain. He had said it just weeks before his heart gave out. "Henry's got a sealed envelope, Lil, just in case." I had laughed then, told him he was planning too far ahead. He'd smiled, that knowing half smile that could silence my doubt. "Faith, Lil. Always keep faith in paper and the people you trust." At the time, I thought it was one of his gentle assurances, another way of saying he believed in me. I didn't understand it was a compass. Now, those words stirred inside me like an ember catching breath. I set the photograph on the table and opened my notebook. The same one I used to jot grocery lists and recipes. Tonight it became a ledger of resolve. I wrote a single sentence across the page: "Find Henry Wallace." Beneath it, I added, "Ask about the sealed envelope." Each letter steadied my hands. Writing had always been my refuge. Ink was a truth that couldn't raise its voice. Charles used to say that handwriting reveals a person's spine. Mine had begun to straighten again. When I closed the notebook, I noticed the thin curtain beside the bed swaying gently. Through the gap, I could see the outline of a distant church steeple, its cross faint against the fog. I thought of all the promises we make inside buildings, vows spoken, oaths signed, and how easily we forget that truth needs shelter too. I took another sip of tea, the warmth settling deep into my chest. The bitterness of the leaves reminded me of strength, quiet, steady, unyielding. Somewhere beyond these walls, my daughter slept under the same roof that had once been my sanctuary. I didn't know if she felt triumph or guilt, or if the difference even mattered to her yet. But I knew one thing. Charles had left more than money behind. He had left foresight, folded into paper and sealed with faith. As the clock on the nightstand ticked toward midnight, I turned off the lamp and lay back. The ceiling was cracked in a pattern that looked almost like a map, each line leading somewhere unknown. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into shadow. Tomorrow, I would visit Henry. I would ask the questions I once thought unnecessary. And perhaps, hidden beneath dust and signatures, I would find the truth my husband trusted me to uncover. Sleep came slowly, heavy but kind. Outside, the rain stopped at last, leaving the world rinsed clean, waiting. Morning light seeped through the thin motel curtains, painting the room in muted gold. I woke to the hum of traffic beyond the window and the faint ache that comes from sleeping on unfamiliar springs. The cup from last night sat empty on the table, its rim ringed with dried tea, an imprint of silence. Today, I would find Henry Wallace, the family attorney my husband trusted. But first, I had to face the part of grief that pretends to care. My phone buzzed across the nightstand. Emily's name blinked on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity, or maybe hope, won out. I answered with a quiet, "Hello." Her voice came brisk and businesslike. "Mom, I've been thinking. You shouldn't be alone in some run-down motel. Let me help you. Ryan and I set up a meeting with an advisor this morning. We just want what's best for you." What's best? Those words carried the scent of perfume covering smoke. Still, I agreed to meet. There are moments when the only way to understand a storm is to stand in its rain. An hour later, I parked outside a glass building downtown, its windows reflecting a sky too clean to trust. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and polished brass. Emily waved from a seating area, her posture composed, every gesture rehearsed. Ryan sat beside her, his arm draped casually across the back of her chair, a silver watch catching the light. "Mom," Emily greeted, standing to hug me. Her embrace was brief, perfunctory, as if affection were an item on an agenda. "You look tired. You shouldn't stress about finances right now. That's what we're here for." Ryan nodded, flashing a practiced smile. "We know how overwhelming these things can be after a loss. We've spoken to Mark. He's one of our firm's top financial advisors. He'll make sure everything runs smoothly." A man in a tailored suit stepped forward, hand extended. "Mrs. Graves, my condolences. Your husband built an impressive portfolio. We just want to streamline management so you can focus on healing." He motioned to a folder on the table, thick with documents. "All we need is your signature on this agreement. It authorizes Emily and Ryan to handle the estate under your direction. Standard procedure for estate consolidation." I glanced at the first page. The words blurred slightly, legal phrases dressed to look harmless. The heading read, "Durable Power of Attorney." My pulse tightened. Emily leaned closer. "It's just a formality, Mom. You don't need to deal with banks and lawyers. You've done enough." I traced the edge of the paper, feeling its weight. "And this would give you full authority?" Ryan cleared his throat. "Only to make routine decisions, investments, taxes, property maintenance. You'll still be in the loop, of course." His voice was smooth, measured, the kind people use when selling umbrellas under a cloudless sky. Emily reached for the pen, placing it gently near my hand. "We're family. Don't you trust us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Trust was a word my husband had engraved into every corner of our lives, but he also taught me that love without clarity can become a contract written in invisible ink. I set the pen down. "I trust love," I said quietly. "But love and legality are not the same." Ryan shifted in his seat, the smile slipping for just a second. "Mom, you're reading too much into this. It's standard." "Standard for whom?" I asked. "For widows who forget to read the fine print?" Emily's tone sharpened. "Why do you always assume the worst? We're trying to help. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I met her eyes. "Harder is how you know it matters." Mark coughed softly, sensing the fracture in civility. "Perhaps Mrs. Graves would prefer to review this with her attorney before signing." "Henry Wallace will look over everything," I said, rising from the chair. "Charles trusted him for a reason." Emily exhaled, her patience thinning. "You'll regret dragging this out, Mom. The longer you wait, the more complicated it gets." I gathered my purse, slipping the unsigned folder back toward Mark. Complication isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the cost of caution. Ryan's voice followed me toward the door, low and tight. "You're making a mistake." I turned, steady and calm. If refusing to hand over my future is a mistake, I can live with it. Outside, the city air carried the smell of rain on hot pavement. Cars passed in a blur, their tires hissing against the street. I walked to my car, each step lighter than the one before. Inside, I sat for a moment, letting the quiet fill the space where argument had been. I opened my notebook on the passenger seat and wrote another line beneath the last. Do not sign without Henry. The ink bled slightly into the paper, sealing the promise. Through the windshield, sunlight glinted off the glass building behind me. Somewhere inside, my daughter stood convinced she knew better. Perhaps one day she'd learn that protection offered through control is not love. It's leverage dressed in sympathy. As I drove away, I reached into my purse and touched the envelope from Charles. Its edges were crisp, its seal unbroken, patient. Faith in paper, he had said. I hadn't yet seen the proof, but I could feel it waiting, steady as a heartbeat, beneath layers of deceit. The afternoon sky hung low and gray, its color matching the heaviness that had settled in my chest. I drove toward the house I once called home, unsure what I hoped to find there. Maybe I wanted to see if Emily would soften, if some piece of the girl who once held my hand at the county fair still lived behind those guarded eyes. The gate stood open, as if daring me to cross. I walked the familiar path lined with hydrangeas, now drooping from neglect. Each petal looked tired, drained of its color. At the front steps, the door loomed tall, freshly painted, erasing the scratches Charles used to run his thumb across before turning the knob. I knocked gently 3 times. Emily appeared moments later, her expression a mask of composure. "Mom, I wasn't expecting you." "I didn't expect to come," I said. "But some things need to be said face to face." She folded her arms. "If this is about that meeting, we were just trying to help. You don't understand how complicated the estate is." "I understand more than you think." Before she could answer, Ryan joined her, stepping onto the porch. His voice carried that careful calm he used when speaking to clients, not family. "Mrs. Graves, this isn't personal. You're grieving, and grief makes people emotional. Let us handle the financial side." I met his gaze. "Grief makes people honest, sometimes for the first time." He looked away, lips pressing into a thin line. Emily sighed and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mom, please. Dad trusted me with everything. He told me I'd be ready for this." I felt the wind shift across the porch, cool and steady. He trusted both of us, but trust isn't something you claim. It's something you prove. Her eyes flashed. "You can't handle $30 million, Mom. You don't even check your email half the time." "That may be true," I said softly. "But I know the difference between help and control." The conversation teetered there, fragile as glass. I thought about all the nights I sat beside her crib, humming lullabies when she wouldn't sleep. About the mornings she came running into our room, clutching her favorite book, begging for one more story before school. I wondered when she stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. "Emily," I said, choosing each word with care, "I built this home. Every wall, every brick, every memory inside it carries my fingerprints. You can repaint the walls, but you can't erase the foundation." She crossed her arms tighter. "Then maybe it's time you rest somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. You've done your part." Her words landed heavier than any door she'd ever closed. Smaller, easier, like I was a piece of furniture ready for storage. I straightened my shoulders. "This isn't about space, Emily. It's about respect." Respect? Her voice rose, brittle. You think respect pays property taxes? Keeps businesses running? You're stuck in the past. I'm the one keeping this family alive. Ryan shifted beside her. It's not worth arguing, he murmured. But I wasn't arguing. I was remembering. The years I spent balancing ledgers while Charles built the company. The nights I stayed awake, calming Emily's fears about college. The way she used to slip her small hand into mine when she was nervous. Now, she stood before me, eyes cold, voice sharp, dismissing a lifetime as if it were a misplaced receipt. She turned toward the door. You're too old to handle this, Mom. Don't make this harder. Old, I repeated quietly, tasting the word like iron. Old enough to have taught you everything you know. Old enough to see what pride looks like when it wears a familiar face. For a moment, silence stretched between us, taut and trembling. Then she reached for the door handle. This conversation is over. I looked past her shoulder, into the hallway where family portraits once hung. They were gone, replaced by minimalist artwork. Beautiful, sterile, empty. She hesitated just once before closing the door. It shut with a finality that shook the air. The sound rippled through me, louder than thunder. I stood there, my hand resting on the railing, the cool metal grounding me. Somewhere deep inside, grief shifted into something steadier. Not anger, not bitterness, resolve. Behind that door, she believed she had won. She had the house, the accounts, the papers signed under her name. She mistook possession for victory, forgetting that truth has its own ledger. I stepped off the porch, my shoes crunching against the gravel. The garden stretched out on either side, familiar and foreign all at once. The wind rustled through the hydrangeas, scattering petals across the path. They fell around me like quiet applause, or perhaps quiet farewell. At the gate, I turned back for the last time. The house looked grander than it felt, its windows gleaming like eyes too proud to cry. I whispered into the breeze, I built the foundation. She just redecorated it. As I walked toward my car, a calmness settled over me. Some lessons, I realized, are written not in books or lectures, but in heartbreak. Charles once told me that dignity isn't about being right. It's about staying true when no one's watching. I opened the car door and paused, glancing at the photograph on the dashboard. Charles in his navy jacket, smiling beneath the oak tree. You knew she'd test me, I murmured. You always did plan ahead. The sky brightened slightly as I started the engine. Somewhere beyond the clouds, I imagined his steady voice reminding me to hold faith in paper and in the people I trust. It was time to see Henry Wallace. The next morning, the sky stretched wide and pale, the kind of light that makes everything appear honest. I drove to the corner office on Maple Street, where our family attorney, Henry Wallace, had practiced for more than 3 decades. The building stood modestly among taller neighbors, a quiet survivor of time and change, much like Henry himself. Inside, the air smelled of paper and polished wood. Certificates lined the walls, their frames slightly crooked from years of sunlight and settling dust. Behind a heavy oak desk sat Henry, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he examined a stack of documents. When he saw me, he rose with a gentle smile. Lillian, he said, reaching out to shake my hand. I'm sorry for your loss. Charles was one of the good ones. He was, I replied softly. And he trusted you. Henry motioned toward the leather chair across from him. Sit, please. How are you holding up? I've been better, I admitted, setting my purse down. Emily's been taking charge. Too much charge, maybe. I came because something feels wrong. He leaned back, studying my face. Go on? There was a meeting, I said. She brought me to a financial advisor, pushed papers across the table, said they were routine. Power of attorney documents. Henry's brows furrowed. You didn't sign them, did you? I shook my head. No, but I think she wanted me to. He exhaled, relief tempered with concern. That's good, because if you had, she could have gained full control of the estate. But even so, she's been moving faster than I expected. What do you mean? He turned to a file on his desk, flipping it open. There was a reading of Charles's will last week. Emily told me you were too distraught to attend. I froze. She told you that? Yes, Henry said slowly. I assumed she was speaking for you. My hands tightened around the edge of the chair. I never refused. She never even told me it was happening. Henry closed the file, his expression darkening. That explains it. Charles was thorough. He left a sealed envelope in my custody with explicit instructions. Open it only in your presence. I thought it was symbolic, something sentimental. But if Emily kept you away, that changes things. The room seemed to still. I could almost hear Charles's voice echoing in the quiet. Keep faith in paper and in the people you trust. What's in the envelope? I asked. Henry opened a drawer and withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope bound with red string. My name was written across the front in Charles's familiar handwriting, steady, deliberate, the way he always wrote checks and love notes alike. He told me it contained a final clause, Henry explained, said it would clarify everything if confusion ever arose. I brushed my fingertips across the surface. He knew this might happen. He suspected tension, Henry said gently. Charles often mentioned that Emily was ambitious. He admired that in her, but worried it might cloud her judgment. The words stung because they were true. Henry adjusted his glasses. Before we open this, I should mention something else. When I reviewed the estate inventory, I noticed some irregular transfers. Several accounts were consolidated under Emily's signature within days of the funeral. She presented a document granting her temporary authority, but I've yet to verify its authenticity. I looked up sharply. She moved money that quickly? Yes, it's not uncommon for heirs to act fast, but in this case, the paperwork didn't match our records. I've already contacted the bank for confirmation. The air in the room thickened. For the first time in days, my sorrow began to harden into purpose. Henry sighed. Charles once told me he'd been in touch with federal consultants for a side project, something about compliance work. He hinted that certain assets were connected to those efforts. Nothing illegal, mind you, but confidential. Federal consultants? I repeated. You mean law enforcement? He hesitated. Possibly. He didn't elaborate, only said that if questions ever arose, the documents would speak for themselves. Faith in paper, foresight in silence. The phrases overlapped in my mind like two halves of a key. Henry leaned forward, his voice steady. If Emily forged any authorization, it's a serious offense. Elder fraud, forgery, obstruction. But before we accuse, we verify. This envelope may contain exactly what we need. I nodded, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest. Then let's open it. He paused, studying me. Are you sure? Once we break the seal, its contents become part of the record. I'm sure, I said. Charles wanted me to see what truth looks like written down. Henry smiled faintly. That sounds like him. He slid a letter opener beneath the string and lifted the flap. The faint scent of old ink drifted out. My heartbeat quickened as he unfolded the papers inside. For a moment, he scanned the lines silently, his eyes narrowing in concentration. Then he looked up. "Lillian, this changes everything." I didn't ask how. I just breathed in, steady and certain, as though Charles were standing beside me again. Somewhere beyond the window, a church bell chimed the hour. Each ring sounded like a promise kept. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he spread the documents across the desk. The paper looked aged, yet carefully preserved. Every word typed with precision, every signature bold and deliberate. My late husband's name, Charles Everett Graves, stood at the top in clean black ink. Beneath it, the title, Amended Last Will and Testament. For a moment, the room felt suspended, as if the air itself paused to listen. I folded my hands in my lap and steadied my breathing. Charles had been a man of few surprises. He planned his life the way an architect sketches a foundation, strong, patient, and exact. If he left something sealed, it was for a reason. Henry adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud, his voice firm but measured. "To my beloved wife, Lillian Graves, I bequeath 70% of all estate assets, including the primary residence and all associated holdings, to be held in her name and discretion." I closed my eyes, the words washing over me like the first sunrise after a storm. The home, our home, had been mine all along. Henry continued, "To my daughter, Emily Graves Hartwell, I leave 30% of the estate, contingent upon conduct toward her mother following my death, subject to trustee discretion and evidentiary standard as outlined in Clause 7C. He stopped, letting the clause breathe between us. The weight of those conditions filled the room. Conduct toward her mother, trustee discretion, evidentiary standard. My husband had known exactly what to protect, not just assets, but integrity. I whispered almost to myself, "He knew her." Henry nodded gently. "Charles drafted this after your last family mediation. He wanted to reward compassion, not ambition." My throat tightened. "He never told me." "He didn't want to burden you," Henry said. "He believed foresight should speak through paper, not persuasion." I reached for the will, tracing the indentation where Charles's pen had pressed into the page. His signature carried the same steadiness that once signed birthday cards and mortgage checks. For years, that handwriting had been the quiet proof of his promises. Henry leaned back. "This clause means Emily's inheritance depends entirely on her behavior toward you. Any evidence of mistreatment or coercion could forfeit her share. So when she locked me out," I murmured, "it becomes more than cruelty. It becomes legal evidence." A quiet calm spread through me, not triumphant, but resolute. Justice, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it lives in the ink of a man who saw tomorrow coming. Henry folded the document carefully, then slid it into a new envelope marked Certified Copy, Client Possession. "We'll file this with the probate court immediately. I'll also contact the bank to freeze any disputed accounts until ownership is verified." I looked up. "Can she challenge it?" "She can try," he said, "but she'd have to prove conduct worthy of trust. The moment she changed those locks, she sealed her own argument." A faint smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. Charles always said a lock protects more than it hides. Henry chuckled softly. He also said justice doesn't shout, it stamps. I nodded. And so it will. For a while, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock filled the silence, each second punctuating the gravity of what had been revealed. I imagined Charles sitting in this very chair months ago, explaining his intentions with that same calm certainty he carried through every decision. He'd always believed that love needed boundaries, not to restrict, but to preserve. I turned toward the window. Outside, sunlight spilled across the street, glinting off windshields and storefront signs. The world carried on, unaware that one signature had just redrawn the map of my life. "Henry," I said, "what happens next?" He straightened the papers into a neat stack. "We initiate a formal notification of amendment. I'll deliver certified copies to all relevant institutions. The property title, investment accounts, and trust documents will be updated under your authority. Emily will be informed, but her portion remains frozen pending review." I took a slow breath. "And what about the forged papers she tried to have me sign?" "That attempt becomes part of the record," he said. "Combined with witness statements and the conduct clause, it strengthens your position. If necessary, we'll open an elder fraud investigation." The words sounded heavy, but necessary. I thought of Emily's face, beautiful, proud, and so sure of her own righteousness. This wasn't the war I wanted, but it was the one she started the night she turned a key against me. I rose from the chair, smoothing the front of my coat. "Thank you, Henry. Charles trusted you, and I see why." He stood as well, offering a small, respectful bow of the head. He believed foresight is love spelled differently. At the door, I paused, holding the envelope close. The paper felt warm from my hands, almost alive. "Henry," I said quietly, "when a door closes, what do you call the space before another opens?" He considered the question, eyes thoughtful. "Proof you're still standing." Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement and blooming magnolia. I walked to my car, the envelope tucked safely inside my purse. For the first time since the funeral, my steps felt steady. Charles had left me more than wealth. He'd left a message written in law and love alike, that trust, when tested, could become its own form of justice. As I reached the car door, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the keyhole in a sudden shimmer. I smiled, sliding the key inside. This time, the lock turned smoothly, obedient, unresisting. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and paper, a place where truth waited in quiet stacks. Henry met me in the lobby, his briefcase tucked beneath one arm, his expression purposeful. "We'll start with the property," he said. "Once the title reflects your name again, we'll freeze every account tied to the forged documents." I nodded, holding the envelope close to my chest. The embossed seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a small circle of faith. Each step echoed down the marble corridor like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, alive. In the records office, a clerk guided us to a narrow counter. Henry slid the certified copy of the amended will across the polished surface. "File this as the governing document," he said. "The previous submission lacks validity." The clerk adjusted her glasses and scanned the pages. Her brow lifted slightly as she reached the conduct clause. "Conditional inheritance?" "Contingent upon behavior," Henry confirmed. "There's been misconduct." She nodded and stamped the corner of the page with a firm motion. The sound rang through the room, a single resonant thud. Justice doesn't shout, it stamps. From there, we moved through the day like clockwork, bank by bank. Signature by signature, Henry presented the documents. At each stop, I watched tellers glance at the pages, their polite expressions shifting to quiet respect. The power of ink, I realized, wasn't in its color, but in the truth it carried. At the last branch, a young manager pulled up my account on her screen. "Mrs. Graves," she said, "the system shows a recent authorization under your daughter's name. Would you like to initiate a hold?" Henry answered before I could. "Freeze every asset associated with that authorization. Effective immediately." The woman hesitated. "That'll lock her access completely." I met her gaze. "Then lock it." She entered the command, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A soft tone chimed from the monitor. "Done," she said. A current of calm moved through me. It wasn't satisfaction, but something sturdier, vindication tempered by sorrow. Charles had prepared me for this moment, though he never said how heavy truth would feel when it finally arrived. As we stepped outside, the afternoon sun spread across the steps, warm and forgiving. Henry loosened his tie. Next, we file a notice of investigation. Detective Ramos from the precinct will handle the verification. Once he confirms the forgery, we'll have grounds for restitution. "Restitution," I repeated quietly. The word felt distant, almost clinical. What I wanted wasn't payback. It was balance. A restoration of what had been taken in silence. We walked toward his car, the briefcase between us like a shared mission. "Henry," I asked, "do you ever get used to this? Watching families tear themselves apart over what's left behind?" He sighed, unlocking the door. "No, but I've learned that honesty is the only inheritance that lasts." Later that evening, I sat alone in the motel room, the envelope resting on the table beside the Chino cup. Outside, crickets hummed beneath the hum of passing cars. I poured hot water into the cup, watching steam curl upward like a whispered prayer. Each step today had been methodical, precise, just as Charles would have done it. Yet the ache in my chest refused to fade. Victory, if that's what this was, carried its own loneliness. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line: "Truth reclaims what pride steals." Then beneath it, "Tomorrow. Ramos." The knock came just as I capped my pen. 2 firm taps. When I opened the door, a tall man in a dark jacket stood beneath the flickering porch light. His badge gleamed at his belt. "Mrs. Graves?" he asked. "Detective Ramos. Henry Wallace said I should stop by. Please come in." He stepped inside, surveying the small room with professional detachment. "I received copies of the documents this afternoon. Looks like we've got a forged power of attorney and unauthorized asset transfers. We'll open a formal investigation. I'll need statements from you and Mr. Wallace and any evidence of coercion." I handed him a folder Henry had prepared. "Everything's there. Emails, bank records, even notes from the meeting where they tried to have me sign." Ramos flipped through the pages, nodding. "This is thorough. We'll issue a freeze order on all contested accounts. Once confirmed, any misuse becomes criminal liability." "Will she know?" I asked. "She'll find out soon enough," he said. "We'll notify her once the paperwork's processed." He paused, looking at me with something almost like empathy. "I've seen plenty of cases like this, but rarely with evidence this clean. Whoever drafted that clause knew exactly what they were doing." I glanced at the envelope. He always did. Ramos closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. "You've done the right thing, Mrs. Graves. Truth may move slowly, but it doesn't lose its way." After he left, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights blink to life. Each one reflected on the rain-slick pavement, tiny circles of brightness in a city that seldom looked up. I lifted the cup to my lips. The tea had cooled, but its warmth lingered on my hands. In that quiet, I felt Charles near, not in voice, but in presence. A steady reminder that faith, once written, cannot be erased. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by the low rumble of an engine. Somewhere across town, Emily would soon discover her accounts frozen, her access denied, her confidence cracking beneath the weight of evidence. I didn't rejoice. I simply breathed, slow and deep, letting the truth settle. Justice, after all, isn't loud. It's steady. And tonight, it had finally begun to move. The phone rang just after dawn, slicing through the stillness of the room. I had barely slept. The events of the previous day lingered in my mind like the scent of rain on stone. The steam from my morning tea curled into soft ribbons beside the window. Outside, a new sun crept over the rooftops, quiet and unaware that justice had shifted hands overnight. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Emily. For a long moment, I simply watched it flash, the rhythm of her calls growing faster, more desperate. 10 missed, then 11. Finally, I answered. Her voice hit me before the greeting. "Mom, what did you do?" I set the cup down carefully. "Good morning, Emily." "This isn't funny," she snapped. "The banks froze everything. Every account, every transfer. I can't even access the trust. What did you tell them?" I stared at the pale light creeping across the motel carpet. I told them the truth. Her breath hitched, part disbelief, part fury. "You can't just—" "I didn't," I interrupted softly. "Your father did." "What are you talking about?" "The sealed envelope," I said. "The one he left with Henry. The one meant to be opened in my presence." Silence fell on the other end. I could almost picture her standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her reflection caught in the glossy tile, so certain of her control, now realizing the floor beneath her had shifted. "You're lying," she said finally, her tone brittle. "Dad wouldn't—" "Your father believed in foresight," I told her. "He trusted paper more than promises. And he trusted me to keep faith with both." A sharp exhale rattled through the line. "So you're punishing me? After everything I've done for this family?" I let her words hang, their weight crumbling under their own contradiction. "Emily, love built this family. Control nearly broke it." Her voice faltered, softer now. "You think you're better than me because you have a piece of paper?" "No," I said, "because I have the truth." There was a pause long enough to hear the hum of the motel's ancient refrigerator. Then came the sound of something crashing in the background, maybe a drawer slammed shut or the clatter of a fallen cup. "I'll fix this," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "I'll call the bank. I'll call Henry. Henry won't undo what your father wrote," I said quietly. "And the bank will listen to the law, not temper." She inhaled sharply. "You think you've won?" "This isn't a victory," I replied. "It's a reminder." Her tone hardened again. "You can't do this to me. I'm your daughter." "Yes," I said, "you are, and I will always love you. But love does not erase consequence." A shaky breath came through the receiver, the sound of a wall beginning to crack. "You're turning everyone against me." "No," I said gently. "You did that when you locked the door." The silence that followed was deeper than anger, edged with the dawning sting of realization. For years, I had avoided confrontation, hoping patience could bridge pride. But some lessons required a ledger, not a lullaby. "Emily," I continued, "your father gave you 30%, contingent upon conduct. You chose to change the locks, forge papers, and move money without consent. He believed integrity should be rewarded, not inherited. "You can't know what he wanted," she cried. "I was married to him for 43 years, I said softly. I knew his heart better than his handwriting. Her breathing grew uneven. "So what now? You take everything. Leave me with nothing?" I closed my eyes. "I take nothing that isn't already mine. You still have time to do the right thing, to face this, tell the truth, make amends. It's not too late." "Maybe not for you," she whispered, "but for me." Her voice broke off, replaced by a strained sigh. Then quietly, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "Then stop." A faint sound escaped her, a sob quickly swallowed, pride refusing to let grief speak its full name. "I have to go," she said, voice trembling. "Emily," I called before she could hang up. "Your father's words weren't punishment. They were hope. Don't let pride turn them into chains." The line went dead. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, leaving only my reflection. Older, yes, but unbroken. Outside, the morning deepened into gold. Cars moved along the street, their windows flashing in the sun. Life went on, indifferent, yet steady. I lifted my cup, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip. The taste was sharper than before, a reminder that even calm waters carry depth. In the distance, I imagined Emily standing amid her own silence, faced with the truth she had tried to bury. Love could not unlock the door she had closed, but law had found the key. I folded my hands, whispering to the quiet, "Justice doesn't need a voice, only proof." Then I reached for my notebook and wrote the date beside a single phrase. "Balance restored begins with one honest morning." By mid-morning, the sky over the courthouse glowed like brushed steel, hard, reflective, unyielding. I met Henry Wallace at his office again, where stacks of folders had multiplied overnight. He greeted me with a nod, his tie slightly loosened, his eyes sharpened by purpose. "Mrs. Graves," he said, gesturing toward a chair, "I've reviewed the full timeline. Your daughter's actions leave little room for interpretation." I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "Tell me." He opened a thick file, the pages filled with neatly clipped documents. 6 days after Charles's funeral, Emily filed a forged power of attorney, granting herself full authority over all estate assets. "The signature isn't yours. It's a copy pasted from a mortgage form you signed years ago." The words landed with the precision of a gavel. My pulse slowed, steady as a metronome. "She forged my name." "Yes, and used it to transfer funds from joint accounts into one registered solely under hers. Total movement, just over $9 million. $9 million. I thought of every hour Charles spent at his desk, glasses low on his nose, balancing columns with the patience of a craftsman. The numbers he built had always been more than currency. They were testament. Henry continued, "We've submitted the evidence to Detective Ramos. He'll verify the documents through the state registrar. Once confirmed, we can proceed with elder fraud charges." "Elder fraud," I repeated softly. "That's what this is called." "It's more than a betrayal of trust," Henry said. "It's a federal offense. And given the conduct clause, her inheritance is automatically void until a judge reviews the evidence." I glanced at the sealed envelope resting beside me, its edge now worn smooth from my touch. Charles must have known she might do this. "He planned for the possibility," Henry said. "Clause 7C was his safety net. It grants the trustee, me, discretion to withhold any portion of the estate if evidence of misconduct arises. And evidentiary standard means we need proof, which, thanks to her impatience, we now have. I closed my eyes briefly. She acted fast because she thought no one was watching. Henry nodded. Greed always moves quicker than conscience. Outside, the wind rattled the window, carrying the faint sound of traffic. I imagined Emily at that very moment, sitting in a kitchen she didn't own, dialing banks that no longer answered. Perhaps she'd begun to realize that love and legality are rarely persuaded by the same argument. Henry leaned forward, his voice gentler now. Lillian, I know this isn't the justice you wanted. No mother dreams of courtrooms and depositions. I never wanted revenge, I said. Only truth. Charles believed that honesty had weight, and that eventually, it lands where it belongs. He smiled faintly. Your husband would be proud. Most people in your position would demand everything. You've asked only for what's right. I returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Right is enough. Henry gathered the papers into a neat stack, securing them with a brass clip. I'll file for an injunction this afternoon. Once the freeze order is extended, Emily won't be able to move a cent without court approval. And when the case goes before a judge, we'll present the forged POA alongside the amended will. Will she go to prison? I asked quietly. That depends on cooperation, he said. If she admits fault, the court may offer leniency. If she resists, the law will teach what family could not. I traced a small pattern on the edge of the desk, remembering how Emily used to doodle flowers in her notebooks as a girl. Somewhere between those petals and these papers, the distance between us had widened into a gulf. Henry, I said, my daughter isn't evil, just afraid. She's trying to control what she doesn't understand. He regarded me for a moment. Perhaps, but fear doesn't excuse fraud. Accountability is the language the law speaks. I nodded, accepting the truth even as it stung. Then let it speak clearly. He placed a hand over the file. It will. I'll handle the filings, and Detective Ramos will coordinate with the bank. You'll receive confirmation within 48 hours. I rose, smoothing the front of my coat. Thank you, Henry, for helping me stand on solid ground again. You built that ground long before I arrived, he said. Charles gave you the blueprint. You're just following it. Outside, the afternoon light shimmered across the courthouse steps. I paused beneath the awning, the envelope tucked safely in my purse. Above me, clouds shifted like curtains parting before a stage. Somewhere behind them, I hoped Charles was watching. Not for triumph, but for peace. In my heart, I could hear his steady voice again. Faith in paper and in the people you trust. The breeze lifted the hem of my coat as I walked toward the car. My reflection in the window looked older. Yes, but steadier, like a woman who had traded sorrow for purpose. The world moved around me, unaware that in one quiet office, justice had begun to take shape, not through anger, but ink. The sky was a deep, forgiving blue that afternoon, the kind that made everything look softer than it felt. I hadn't been back to the house since the locks changed, but Henry insisted I come. It's better you're present, he'd said. This isn't about confrontation. It's about closure. I arrived just before the guests. The gate stood open, trimmed hedges lining the path like silent witnesses. Emily was hosting a garden luncheon, one of those events she adored, all polished silverware and practiced smiles. I remembered how she used to hide behind my skirt when strangers visited. Now she stood in front of everyone, determined to prove she needed no one. As I stepped through the archway of roses, conversation drifted across the lawn. Laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of polite gossip. Round tables dotted the grass, white linens fluttering in the breeze. The scent of peonies mingled with champagne. For a moment, it looked like a scene from her wedding years ago, before ambition hardened the softness in her eyes. She spotted me near the fountain, her smile faltering. "Mom," she said, voice tight, "I didn't expect you here." "I was invited once," I said gently, "when this house was still a home." Ryan appeared beside her, his hand resting on her back like a guide steering a ship. "Mrs. Graves," he greeted, polite but distant. "You're welcome to stay, of course. There's always room for family." "Family," I echoed, a word that shouldn't need an invitation. Before either could reply, Henry approached, briefcase in hand, a pair of uniformed officers behind him. The crowd's laughter dulled into murmurs as people turned to watch. Emily's face paled. "What is this?" Henry stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but clear. "Mrs. Hartwell, you are under investigation for elder fraud, forgery, and unauthorized transfers of estate assets." Ryan stiffened. "This is ridiculous. You can't just storm in." Detective Ramos stepped forward, badge gleaming under the afternoon sun. "Emily Graves Hartwell, you're under arrest. Please stand where you are." Gasps rippled through the guests. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered against the stone walkway, echoing through the hush. Emily's hands trembled as she turned to me. "Mom, what did you do?" I met her gaze. "What your father did. He wrote the truth." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You can't mean this. You wouldn't let them." "I'm not letting them do anything," I said softly. "The law is." The officers moved closer. Ryan stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. "Emily, don't say a word." But silence had never been her strength. "I was trying to protect what's ours," she cried. "You don't understand how hard this is, how much pressure." Detective Ramos interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Ma'am, please turn around." Emily froze. The air seemed to still with her. Finally, she lowered her eyes and did as instructed. The click of metal cuffs sounded small, almost fragile. The same sound that once came from the lock on my front door. Guests whispered behind gloved hands. Some looked away, others stared openly, their curiosity mixing with discomfort. A woman near the hydrangeas whispered, "Is that her mother?" As if sorrow could be gossip. I stood silent, hands clasped before me. This wasn't triumph. It was testament. Proof that truth, though patient, never forgets its path. As the officers led her toward the gate, she looked back once, her eyes glistening. "You've humiliated me." I shook my head. "You did that when you chose deception over decency." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. The roses brushed her shoulder as she passed beneath the arch, their thorns catching faintly on her sleeve. Ryan lingered behind, his face a careful mask. "This isn't over," he muttered. Henry met his gaze evenly. "No, it's only beginning." The murmurs faded as the guests quietly dispersed, leaving behind half-eaten desserts and overturned napkins. The breeze carried away the perfume of peonies, mingling it with the faint scent of ink from Henry's papers. He turned to me. "You all right?" I nodded. "There's no joy in watching your child fall, even if gravity is justice." Henry closed his briefcase. "Still, you stood firm. That matters." I looked across the garden, the trimmed hedges, the marble fountain, the chairs neatly arranged as if expecting an audience. This had been the stage of my humiliation once, when a locked door silenced me. Now it bore witness to truth, written long ago by a man who loved foresight more than flourish. As we walked toward the exit, The late afternoon light spilled across the grass, bright and tender. Somewhere in that glow, I felt Charles beside me again, steady, calm, reminding me that love measured in honesty never fades. At the gate, I paused and turned back. The garden shimmered under the sun, a picture of order disturbed only by the echo of what had just transpired. It struck me that pruning isn't punishment. It's how a garden learns to grow again. I whispered to the quiet air. The garden she pruned me out of, now pruned her. Henry glanced at me, understanding flickering in his eyes. Charles would have smiled at that. Maybe, I said, but he'd remind me to water the roses anyway. We stepped through the gate, the latch closing behind us with a sound both gentle and final. Justice had stamped its mark, not with noise, but with truth, quiet, unyielding, and utterly fair. The holding facility sat at the edge of town, a low concrete building framed by chain-link fences and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Inside, everything smelled of metal and disinfectant, the kind of place where time stretched thin and mercy came slow. Henry walked beside me through a hallway lined with glass partitions, his shoes echoing against the tile. "She's been processed," he said quietly. Conditional bail was granted. The court recognized family involvement as mitigating. She can await trial under supervision, provided her passport stays surrendered. I nodded, not sure what comfort that offered. "And Ryan?" "Still under investigation," Henry said. "His role will unfold soon enough. For now, Emily's the one who asked to see you." We stopped at a small interview room. Through the window, I saw my daughter seated at a metal table. Her posture slumped, her hands folded as if holding something fragile. Gone was the crisp blouse and rehearsed confidence. The woman waiting for me looked smaller, stripped of certainty, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. The guard opened the door. I stepped inside. Emily looked up, and for the first time in months, I saw not defiance, but fear. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thin, as if every word had to fight its way out. I sat opposite her, the chair cold beneath my palms. "Hello, sweetheart." Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't think it would go this far. I studied her face, the same freckles that once dotted her nose after summer picnics, the same lips that used to tremble when she was caught sneaking cookies from the pantry. "Actions always go as far as their intent," I said gently. "You built this with your choices." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "I thought I was helping. Dad trusted me with the company reports, the accounts. I wanted to prove I could handle it. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't just move money, Emily," I said softly. "You moved trust, and trust doesn't always find its way back." Her voice cracked. "I thought if I took control, I could fix everything, keep the family strong. I was scared you'd lose it all." I leaned forward. "Strength without ethics is just force. You were never asked to fix what wasn't broken. You were asked to honor it." She looked down at her hands. "They said I'd go to prison." "That's up to the court," I said. "But the first verdict is the one you give yourself. What you decide to carry after this, that's the sentence that lasts." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the lights filled the silence, steady and sterile. Then she lifted her gaze again. "Do you hate me?" The question struck deep. "No," I said firmly. "Hate is heavy. I've carried enough weight. What I feel is sorrow for what you've lost and for how long it might take you to see what remains." Tears spilled over, tracing clean lines down her cheeks. "I ruined everything." "No," I said. "You revealed what was already fragile. Now you get to decide whether to rebuild or walk away." She covered her face, shoulders shaking. It was a sound I hadn't heard since she was a little girl crying over a scraped knee, when comfort was as simple as a bandage and a kiss. I wanted to reach across the table, to gather her into my arms, but there are moments when love must stand still, so truth can reach. When she finally lowered her hands, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by telling the truth," I said. "To yourself first, then to the court, and when you're ready, to your own reflection." The door opened softly behind me. Henry stepped in, papers in hand. "Mrs. Graves," he said, nodding to Emily. "The bail agreement's been approved. She'll be released under supervision, but all assets remain frozen." Emily looked at him, then back at me. "Does that mean I can go home?" Henry shook his head. "Not yet. The property is under your mother's name now. You'll stay with your counsel until the hearing." Emily swallowed hard, then turned to me. "Where will you be?" I smiled faintly. Exactly where I was before the locks changed, standing by the truth. She blinked away fresh tears. "Mom, I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," I said. "But mercy isn't earned. It's given, one choice at a time." The guard reappeared, signaling time was up. Emily rose slowly, her movements unsteady. She hesitated before stepping toward the door, then turned back. "Will you come to the hearing?" "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "Justice isn't about watching you fall. It's about seeing you rise for the right reasons." As the door closed behind her, I felt Henry's hand rest lightly on my shoulder. "You handled that better than most would." "She's still my daughter," I said quietly, "and forgiveness doesn't always wait for apologies." We walked out into the sunlight, the air cool and clean after a morning rain. Behind the fences, a gate creaked open, releasing someone into the uncertain world beyond. Henry glanced at me. "What now?" I looked toward the horizon. Now we see if truth can teach what love could not. And as we reached the parking lot, I realized forgiveness isn't a surrender. It's a reclamation, the quiet act of keeping your heart unbroken while the world learns its lesson. The following afternoon, I met Mrs. Hartwell at a private club on the east side of town, the sort of place where conversations were wrapped in linen napkins and secrets were exchanged over fine china. She had asked to see me for the sake of the family's dignity. Those were her exact words. Dignity, I'd learned, was often what people invoked when they really meant silence. A waiter led me through the hushed dining room to a corner booth. Mrs. Hartwell sat poised behind a crystal glass of mineral water, pearls resting neatly against her collarbone. The air around her shimmered with the faint scent of lavender and authority. "Mrs. Graves," she said as I approached, rising only halfway before settling back into her seat. "Thank you for coming. I know this can't be easy." "It hasn't been," I replied, taking the chair across from her. She gestured toward the waiter, who appeared instantly. "2 teas, please. Earl Grey, and bring the envelope." The last phrase hung in the air like a coded command. When the waiter returned, he placed a leather folder beside my saucer. Inside was a check, neatly folded, its edges aligned with precision. Mrs. Hartwell lifted her cup, stirring sugar into the steaming liquid. "I'll be direct," she said. "This situation with Emily and Ryan has become untidy. Public spectacles benefit no one. You're a mother. You understand the importance of protecting one's child." I met her gaze, steady and calm. Protection and concealment aren't the same. She smiled, a small, knowing curve. You're principled. I admire that. But principles don't rebuild reputations. $5 million, she said, sliding the folder toward me. To withdraw the charges. You regain your peace. Emily avoids prison, and the family spares itself a headline. I looked down at the folder but didn't touch it. Peace bought with silence isn't peace. It's debt. She tilted her head slightly, pearls glinting under the chandelier. Surely there's room for discretion. The court of public opinion can be cruel, especially to women who've already endured so much. Wouldn't it be kinder to let this fade quietly? Kindness isn't measured in hush money, I said. For a heartbeat, something sharp flashed in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or disbelief that someone could refuse a sum so neatly calculated. She leaned forward, her tone softening. You think you know the whole story, but are you certain you understand what Charles was involved in? Some accounts, some payments, they may not look as clean under scrutiny. My breath caught. What are you implying? She stirred her tea again, watching the liquid swirl. Only that shadows linger where wealth grows quickly. Are you sure you want the light turned so bright? Investigations can reveal more than intended. It was a clever strike, doubt wrapped in civility. But Charles had never been careless. His handwriting was meticulous, his conscience even more so. Still, her words pressed against a tender place in my mind. Are you suggesting my husband did something wrong? I asked quietly. Not wrong, she said smoothly. Complicated. Men of influence often have arrangements. It would be a shame if certain details confused the narrative. I folded my hands in my lap. If there's truth to find, I'll face it. Charles believed integrity could survive any light. Mrs. Hartwell sighed, as though I were a stubborn student refusing the easier lesson. You've already won what matters. Your home, your assets, your name. Why risk more? Take the offer. Close the door. I lifted my cup, letting the steam rise between us. The door I'm closing is the one that lets silence disguise sin. Her expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Perhaps, I said, but at least it will be mine. She reached into her clutch and drew out a business card, sliding it across the table. If you change your mind, my number hasn't changed. We all have a threshold, Mrs. Graves. Pray you don't reach yours. I looked at the card, then back at her. Thresholds aren't warnings. They're reminders of where we stop bending. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Her eyes flicked toward the envelope still resting by my hand. Think about Emily, she said softly, about what a trial will do to her. I have, I said, and I hope one day she'll understand that consequences are teachers the heart remembers. Mrs. Hartwell's lips pressed into a thin line. She rose, smoothing her skirt. I see where Emily gets her resolve. Let's hope she also learns your timing. She turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The waiter appeared again, hovering by the table. I pushed the folder toward him. Return this to Mrs. Hartwell, please. He nodded and carried it away. I sat in silence for a long moment, tracing the rim of my teacup. Outside the window, the city moved at its usual pace, unaware of the quiet battle waged over a cup of tea and an unsigned check. Charles's voice drifted through my memory. Faith in paper and the people you trust. The check before me represented neither. I stood, leaving a few bills on the table, and stepped out into the afternoon light. The air was brisk, clear and honest. As I walked down the steps, I whispered to the breeze, "Privacy protects shame, not justice." And with that, I turned toward the one place where truth still waited to be uncovered. The study where Charles had once kept every ledger, every secret, every piece of faith written in ink. The study was quieter than I remembered, its stillness layered with dust and memory. Late afternoon light filtered through the drapes, falling across the desk where Charles had spent countless evenings balancing figures only he seemed to understand. I stood in the doorway for a moment, reluctant to cross the threshold. It felt like stepping into a conversation, paused mid-sentence. The air held the faint scent of cedar and old paper. On the shelves, rows of ledgers stood in perfect order, spines labeled with neat white tags. Charles's handwriting, steady, careful, marked everyone. I traced my finger along them, whispering the years under my breath. 1998, 2003, 2010. Each volume was a chapter of our life, written not in words, but in numbers. Each calculation, a promise kept. Henry joined me quietly, carrying a leather folder under his arm. This was where he worked? Every night after dinner, I said softly. He said a man's worth wasn't in what he earned, but what he left in order. He smiled faintly. Sounds like him. I nodded toward the desk. There's something here he wanted me to see. Together, we began sorting through the drawers. Receipts, handwritten notes, certificates, everything placed with precision. Charles had always believed clarity was its own kind of protection. Then, beneath a stack of tax filings, Henry found a thin black binder marked Harbor Group LLC. He opened it carefully. Inside were transaction records spanning more than a decade. The entries were detailed, referencing accounts in Zurich, Singapore, and the Caymans. Large sums moved in, smaller ones out. No explanations, no notes. Henry frowned. These are offshore transfers. I leaned closer, scanning the pages. Are they illegal? Not necessarily, he said, but they're unusual, especially for someone like Charles. He wasn't a risk-taker. These look like shadow accounts, possibly linked to private holdings. The term shadow accounts landed heavily between us. My stomach tightened. Mrs. Hartwell hinted at this, I admitted. She said I might not like what the light would show. Henry turned a page, his eyes narrowing. Look here. These deposits aren't random. They're consistent, same amount, same source every quarter. He pointed to the notation beside each. DOJC payment. I read it aloud. Department of Justice? He nodded slowly. It's possible. Could be informant compensation or a federal cooperation fund. That would explain why they were kept quiet. If Charles was assisting federal investigations, they'd require confidentiality. I sank into the chair behind the desk, the leather creaking softly. He never told me. Not once. Henry rested his hand on the open page. Maybe he couldn't. These aren't the kind of accounts you discuss, even at home. He was protecting you. I looked around the room, the framed photographs, the collection of pens, the model sailboat he built one winter. It all felt suddenly heavier, as though every familiar object carried a secret. He trusted me with his heart, I murmured, but not his burden. Burden or safeguard, Henry said. Depends how you read it. If these funds are legitimate, they're proof of integrity, not deception. I turned the page again. At the back of the ledger, Charles had written a single line in his handwriting. Steady, deliberate, unmistakable. Faith must be ledgered too. The words caught in my throat. He knew one day I'd find this. Henry closed the binder gently. Then he left it for you to finish the story. But we'll need confirmation. If these accounts connect to federal cooperation, we'll need to contact the right agency. Quietly. I nodded, still staring at the page. And if they're not? He hesitated. Then we deal with whatever truth comes. But Lillian, look at the consistency, the transparency. This doesn't read like laundering. It reads like reporting. I exhaled slowly. He was always meticulous. Even in secrecy, he'd still balance the books. The late sun shifted, casting long lines of gold across the desk. I closed my eyes, listening to the silence settle. Somewhere beyond the window, a bird called out, its song faint but steady. He once told me numbers never lie, I said. But they don't comfort either. Henry nodded. Truth rarely does, but it clarifies. I opened my eyes and looked down at the ledger once more. The entries stared back, unwavering. Somewhere inside these columns lay the answer. Whether redemption or revelation, I didn't yet know. We'll verify it, Henry said. I'll reach out to a contact I trust at the DOJ. Discretion is key. I stood, smoothing the page before closing the cover. If Charles carried faith in silence, I can carry patience. As we left the study, I paused at the doorway and glanced back. Dust motes danced in the beam of fading light, like whispers suspended in air. I thought of the Shino cup in my motel room, the sealed envelope, the conduct clause, each piece part of a puzzle built not from suspicion, but preparation. Charles hadn't left me secrets. He'd left me steps. And tonight, another one had revealed itself, leading not into shadow, but toward understanding. Henry, I said as we reached the hall, call your contact. Tomorrow we ask the light to speak. He nodded. And if the truth is more complicated than we hope? I smiled faintly. Then we'll ledger that too. We stepped out into the evening, the air cool and clean, the horizon washed in fading gold. Some revelations arrive like storms, but others, I realized, come as sunsets, quiet, necessary, and impossible to ignore. Henry's office always smelled faintly of polished oak and ink, the kind of place where the weight of history lingered in every drawer. That night, the building should have been empty. The courthouse clock had already struck 11, and most of the city had quieted into its nocturnal hum. But in the footage captured by the security cameras, movement flickered. I wasn't there when it happened, but Henry described it to me later, his voice clipped and steady as he played back the grainy black and white images. A man in a dark hood slipped through the back entrance, the latch forced open with something thin and metallic. He moved quickly, like someone who knew exactly where to look. In the video, the intruder went straight for the file cabinet marked G.H. He pulled open drawers, rifled through folders, ignoring everything except what might hold the name Graves. When Henry called me the next morning, his tone carried both calm and urgency. Lillian, there was a break-in. I gripped the phone tighter. At your office? Yes, but nothing's missing. Not officially. They didn't find the ledger. My heart sank. Do you know who it was? He paused. Not yet, but Detective Ramos does. The cameras caught a clear shot as the intruder left. A license plate reflected off the glass door. It's registered to a rental car in Ryan Hartwell's name. The silence between us was sharp as glass. My son-in-law, Emily's husband. I wasn't surprised, not truly, but the confirmation carried a sting. So he sent someone, I whispered. Or came himself, Henry said. We're still verifying. Ramos has already called him in for questioning. Later that day, I sat with Henry in his office as Ramos replayed the footage again, slowing it frame by frame. The figures build, the angle of his jaw as the hood slipped for an instant, familiar enough to stir recognition. Ramos leaned back, arms crossed. Desperation always forgets the cameras. He thought no one was watching. Henry rubbed his forehead. The attempt alone strengthens your case. It proves they're trying to obstruct. Any judge will see this as consciousness of guilt. I looked at the screen, the flickering image of the man I once welcomed into my family. Ryan had stood beside Emily at their wedding, promising to protect her. Now he was breaking into offices under the cover of night, chasing secrets that weren't his to hold. "Will he be arrested?" I asked quietly. "Question first," Ramos said. "But obstruction is on the table. If he admits, it only deepens Emily's liability. If he denies, we'll let the evidence speak." Henry closed the laptop and folded his hands. "They're cornered, Lillian. Every move they make to conceal only confirms what Charles anticipated." I thought of Charles sitting at this same desk years ago, his calm eyes steady behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had always believed foresight was stronger than force. In his silence, he'd prepared for this very storm. That night, back at the motel, I lay awake listening to the rain tap against the thin window pane. The image of Ryan rifling through Henry's office played in my mind like a broken reel. Not just betrayal, but desperation. And desperation was dangerous. I rose from bed and poured myself a cup of tea in the paper cup, its warmth anchoring me against the chill. Charles's words returned to me. Faith in paper and in the people you trust. The paper was holding strong. The people were breaking apart. The next morning, Henry called again. Ramos brought Ryan in. He denied everything, of course, but the rental agreement and footage are irrefutable. Charges will be filed. I closed my eyes, letting the news settle. Then the garden isn't the only place with weeds. Henry's voice softened. "You're holding steady, Lillian. Not many could stand so firm." "It isn't firmness," I said. "It's faith. Charles built the scaffolding. I'm only standing where he left me." As I hung up, I looked out the motel window. The sun broke through the clouds, striking the wet pavement until it glistened. Shadows and light together, both real, both part of the same truth. In that glow, I whispered to myself, desperation always forgets the cameras. It wasn't triumph. It was simply the next page in a ledger Charles had already started, one I was determined to finish with the same steady hand he left behind. The letter arrived early the next morning, slipped under my motel door without a sound. No return address, only my name typed neatly across the envelope. I stood still for a moment, the paper cool beneath my fingertips, before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet, written in Emily's familiar handwriting, curved, careful, almost childlike. "Mom, let's end this before it destroys us. I'll give you the house, $5 million, and my public apology. In return, you drop the case. We can rewrite this story before it's too late. Please, let's find peace." Her plea lingered between the lines. Fear wrapped in reason, desperation dressed as reconciliation. I folded the letter and stared out the window. Morning light spilled across the pavement, painting long shadows that reached toward the horizon. Shadows that reminded me peace built on silence could never stand. By afternoon, Henry and I met in his office. The envelope lay open on his desk. He read it once, then again, his brow furrowing. "A settlement," he said at last. "She's trying to buy stillness." "She calls it peace," I said quietly. "Peace isn't purchased. Henry replied. Not with checks and not with conditions. He tapped the page with one finger. If you accept this, the case dissolves. No investigation, no record, no lesson. The conduct clause would remain untested. She'd walk free, and the truth would remain buried. I leaned back in the chair, letting the silence fill the room. $5 million, I murmured. It's the exact amount her mother-in-law offered. Henry nodded. A coordinated attempt. Mrs. Hartwell's fingerprints are all over this. They want to turn consequence into transaction. I thought of Mrs. Hartwell's calm eyes across the tea table, the weight of her words. Are you sure you know everything about Charles? Doubt, once planted, had a way of finding sunlight. She thinks she can shake me with secrets, I said. But Charles left clarity, not stains. Henry clasped his hands. Lillian, I need your decision. If we reject the offer, things move forward. Indictments, hearings, exposure. It will hurt, even if you win. I met his gaze. Justice doesn't bargain, Henry. It breathes or it doesn't. There's no halfway. He smiled faintly. Charles would have said that too. I unfolded the letter again, tracing the words with my finger. The script wavered slightly, Emily's confidence faltering perhaps, or her hand trembling as she wrote, "Before it destroys us." She still didn't understand. The destruction hadn't come from law, it came from lies. I'll write. Her back, I said. Henry nodded. Keep it brief, firm, not cruel. That evening, I sat at the motel desk, pen in hand, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the quiet. The page before me remained blank for a long time. I thought of Emily as a child, running barefoot through the garden, clutching a crayon drawing that simply read, "For Mom." I thought of the woman she'd become, building fortresses out of contracts and signatures. Somewhere between those drawings and these documents, we had lost each other. Finally, I began to write. Emily, I received your letter. I read it twice, once as a mother, once as a witness. As a mother, I ache for your fear. As a witness, I cannot ignore what is written in truth. The house was never yours to give, and silence is not mine to sell. Peace that hides the wound is not healing, it's delay. If you want peace, come into the light. Tell the truth. Stand beside it. Only then can we call it ours. Mom. When I finished, I sealed the letter and set it beside the lamp. The act felt heavier than any signature I had ever placed on paper. The next day, Henry delivered my response through her counsel. By evening, the phone rang. I let it ring twice before answering. Emily's voice was quiet, almost hollow. You got my letter. I did, I said. And you said no. I said truth first. Her breath caught. You think this is easy for me? Watching everything crumble? Do you know how many people are whispering about me? I do, I said gently. And whispers stop mattering when you learn to stand in daylight. I was trying to make things right, she insisted. No, Emily, I said softly. You were trying to make them disappear. The silence stretched. I could hear her breathing, shallow and uneven. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. What do you want from me? The same thing your father wanted, I said. Accountability. And the chance to begin again, honestly. Her tone broke on a single word. I'm scared. I know, I whispered, but courage doesn't start when you're safe. It starts when you're seen. There was nothing more to say. She ended the call quietly, and I sat there a long while, staring at the reflection of my own face in the dark window. Lines of age? Yes. But also of endurance. Henry arrived later with an update. Her counsel confirmed she's declining the plea deal. The prosecution will proceed. I nodded, feeling the weight settle yet lift all at once. Good. The truth deserves its day. As he left, I poured myself a cup of tea and carried it to the window. Outside, the first stars pricked through the evening sky, small, persistent, unbought lights. I lifted the cup in their direction. Some offers, I murmured, are cages dressed in kindness. The steam curled upward, vanishing into the dark. I closed my eyes and let the quiet fill me, steady and sure. Tomorrow, the next step would come. Tonight, integrity was enough. The federal building sat along the river, its glass walls gleaming in the afternoon light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished floors, a place where truth wasn't whispered, but documented. Henry walked beside me, a reassuring presence amid the hum of footsteps and distant printers. He carried the black binder labeled Harbor Group LLC tucked under his arm, its weight symbolic as much as literal. We passed through a metal detector, then followed an agent down a long corridor to a conference room with no windows. The walls were plain, the table wide and empty except for a single digital recorder at its center. Across from us sat a woman in a navy blazer, her expression calm, her posture precise. "Mrs. Graves," she said, extending her hand. "Agent Nora Davis, Department of Justice." Her handshake was firm, not forceful. I could see a quiet steadiness in her eyes, the kind of strength that didn't need raising its voice to command a room. "Thank you for meeting with us," she said. "Mr. Wallace mentioned you have materials concerning your late husband, Charles Graves." Henry placed the binder on the table and slid it toward her. "Ledger entries, offshore accounts, consistent quarterly deposits marked DOJC payment. We believe these are cooperation funds." Nora flipped open the binder, scanning the pages with quick, practiced eyes. "This handwriting? His?" I nodded. Every line. Charles kept meticulous records. He believed in balancing numbers as a matter of conscience. Her gaze softened. "I read your husband's name years ago. He assisted with a financial crimes investigation, providing key testimony. The payments align with the informant ledger. Harbor Group LLC was a holding entity we used for discreet disbursement." A swell of relief rose in my chest. "So it's legitimate." "Yes," Nora said. "Completely. These aren't shadow funds. They're cooperation payments authorized under federal statute. Your husband helped uncover laundering within several corporate trusts, including ones tied to Hartwell Capital." I turned to Henry, who exhaled slowly. "Then Mrs. Hartwell's hints were half-truths," he said. "Enough to breed doubt, but not enough to stand in light." Nora nodded. "That's often how leverage works. People weaponize mystery. But Mr. Graves's record is clear. We verified his integrity years ago." She paused, then looked directly at me. What we didn't expect was for his documentation to resurface now, and in the hands of someone brave enough to use it. I folded my hands. Bravery is just what's left when you've tried everything else. Nora smiled gently. "Sometimes, but it's also a choice." She closed the binder. "Mrs. Graves, your husband's work didn't end with him. The funds and records you've preserved could help us finalize an ongoing case against fraudulent investment schemes, including the one your daughter and her husband are entangled in. We're preparing a sting operation." The room seemed to still. "You're saying their company is under investigation?" "Yes," she said. "Hartwell Capital's been on our radar for months. The forged documents and unauthorized transfers linked to your estate strengthen the evidence chain. With your cooperation, we can move swiftly and safely." I glanced at Henry, who met my eyes. "This could end everything," he said, lawfully, permanently. Nora folded her hands. "Mrs. Graves, I have to ask, would you be willing to participate in a monitored meeting? Nothing dramatic, just a conversation recorded under controlled conditions. You'd be accompanied and protected. It would confirm their intent and finalize probable cause." I felt a chill ripple down my spine, not from fear, but recognition. For months, I had spoken my truth into empty rooms, into locked doors, into silence. Perhaps it was time for silence itself to speak back. I took a breath. What would it require? "A meeting," Nora said, "on your terms. They'll believe you're considering a settlement. You'll wear a wire and we'll handle the rest." Henry's jaw tightened. "You're sure this is necessary?" "Without her testimony, we'll still have a case," Nora replied. "But with her presence, we'll have a conclusion." I looked down at my hands that had once packed lunches, signed permission slips, folded laundry, and now held the power to expose corruption. "For so long I thought strength meant endurance," I said. "Maybe it also means participation." Nora nodded. "Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it asks for a chair at the table." I met her gaze. "Then set the table. I'll be there." She leaned back slightly, the faintest hint of respect crossing her face. "We'll coordinate the details through Mr. Wallace. The operation will be discreet. You'll be safe." Safe. The word felt both comforting and foreign. There was no safety in silence, I realized. Only delay. The real danger lay in letting deceit continue unchecked. As we left the room, the hallway seemed brighter, the echo of our steps sharper. Outside, the river glimmered beneath the setting sun, gold ripples catching the light. I paused at the steps, feeling the weight of what was ahead. Henry touched my arm. "Are you certain?" I looked toward the horizon, where the sun sank low but resolute. Charles lived his truth quietly. It's time I let mine speak. We walked to the car together, the air brisk with evening promise. Somewhere behind us, in a building filled with sealed files and sworn oaths, a plan had begun to take shape. One that would let honesty stand in its full height, uncloaked, unbending. And for the first time since the lock clicked shut, I felt not just steady, but ready. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. The river outside my window moved like dark silk, glinting faintly under the moonlight. Every sound, the hum of the lamp, the ticking clock, the faint creak of the floorboards, felt magnified, as if the room itself was waiting with me. Charles's old wedding band rested on the nightstand beside my tea, its circle reflecting a promise that still held faith in paper and in people you trust. By morning, the sky turned the pale color of determination. I dressed simply, navy blouse, gray coat, the Chino cup tucked safely in my bag. I wanted one familiar thing to hold in the quiet before everything changed. Henry met me in the motel lobby, carrying a briefcase and the calm resolve of a man who'd stood beside truth more times than he could count. "You're certain you're ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the lock clicked," I said. Outside, Agent Nora Davis waited by a black sedan. Her manner was steady, her voice firm. "The wire is light," she said, placing a small device in my hand. "Once it's secured, forget it's there. Speak naturally. Let them lead." I nodded. "And you'll be close?" "We'll be closer than they think," she replied. "Just trust the process." The meeting was set in the very house Emily once barred me from, a cruel symmetry, but fitting. When we arrived, sunlight filtered through the garden archway, casting long shadows across the walkway. The house stood as it always had, elegant, proud, indifferent to the storms inside. Ryan opened the door before I could knock. His smile was strained, his eyes restless. "Mrs. Graves," he greeted. "Thank you for coming. Emily's been waiting." Inside, the air smelled faintly of roses and tension. Emily stood by the dining table, her blouse immaculate, her composure brittle. The documents were already laid out, a neat stack beside a polished silver pen. "Mom," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Let's sit. We don't need lawyers today, just family." I took my seat slowly, setting the Shino cup before me. "Family built this house," I said. "The law will decide if it keeps it." Ryan poured water into crystal glasses, his hands steady but his jaw tight. "We're not here to fight. We're here to close this gracefully." Emily leaned forward. "We'll transfer the house back, sign over your full share of the assets. You walk away, the case disappears. No headlines, no hearings. We can rebuild from here." I studied her face, the flicker of calculation behind her eyes, the tremor she tried to disguise with poise. "And the forged documents?" I asked. "The money you moved? The will you ignored?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mistakes. Ones we can fix quietly." I glanced at the pen gleaming under the chandelier. "Quiet fixes are what brought us here," Ryan interjected, his tone slipping into persuasion. "Mrs. Graves, think of Emily. She's your daughter. You've already proven your point." I looked at him evenly. "A point doesn't prove truth. Evidence does." The room chilled with silence. Emily's eyes darted to Ryan's, then back to me. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, voice trembling. "You think one piece of paper makes you righteous?" I folded my hands on the table. "Not righteous, just prepared." Her voice rose. "You'd rather ruin me than forgive me." "Forgiveness is yours," I said softly. "But consequence is the court's." She stood suddenly, knocking her chair back. "You can't do this to me." "Emily," I said quietly, "I'm not doing anything. You are." That's when it happened. The faint buzz in my ear, barely perceptible, followed by Agent Davis's calm voice through the receiver. "Now, Mrs. Graves, ask the question." I steadied my breath. "Emily," I said, keeping my tone gentle, "when did you find out about your father's secret accounts?" Her eyes widened. "What?" Ryan turned sharply. "What accounts?" She froze, realization flashing across her face. "The harbor funds," she said quickly. I saw the statements after he died." Ryan's expression twisted. "You said they were gone. You said they were—" He stopped mid-sentence, too late. The front door burst open. "FBI, don't move." Agents swarmed the room in practiced motion, voices firm but controlled. Papers flew as Ryan stepped back, hands raised. Emily's gasp cut through the air like glass shattering. Agent Davis entered behind them, badge glinting, her calm intact. "Emily Graves Hartwell, Ryan Hartwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice." Emily stared at me, disbelief turning to something deeper, an ache I'd known too well. "Mom, how could you?" I rose slowly. "Legally," Ryan shouted as they cuffed him. "You set us up." "No," I said. "You set the stage." The truth just entered the room. The agents guided them out, the clink of handcuffs echoing against the marble floor. Emily glanced back once, eyes wet, voice small. "I just wanted control." I held her gaze. "You mistook control for care. One builds, the other breaks." When the door closed, the house fell silent again, save for the rustle of papers and the distant chirp of birds beyond the garden. Agent Davis turned to me, nodding once. "You did well, Mrs. Graves. You let silence speak." I looked around the room, our dining room, our laughter once etched into its walls, and felt the weight of everything that had happened here. Betrayal, loss, truth, and finally, balance. Henry stepped forward, resting a steady hand on my shoulder. "It's over." "No," I said softly. "It's begun." Outside, the sunlight streamed through the archway of roses, casting a path ahead. As I stepped onto it, I whispered to the breeze, "Justice doesn't shout, it breathes." And for the first time, I felt the air fill my lungs without ache. The morning after the arrests, I returned to the house alone. The gate creaked softly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the quiet street. The roses along the fence had begun to bloom again, bright and unbothered by what the walls had witnessed. Inside, everything was still. The air smelled faintly of cedar polish and rain from the night before. I paused in the entryway, letting the silence settle. This house had been a stage for love and betrayal, laughter and loss. But now, at last, it belonged to truth again. In the study, Henry was waiting, a folder open on the desk beside the ledger we had discovered. Agent Nora Davis stood nearby, her presence calm and steady, a quiet mirror of the justice she carried. "I wanted to deliver this in person," she said. "We've completed verification of every document." She handed me a letter printed on embossed paper bearing the Department of Justice seal. I unfolded it carefully. This letter serves as confirmation that Charles Everett Graves, during the years 2011 through 2021, served as a confidential federal informant. The Harbor Group LLC accounts were established to manage cooperation payments in connection with federal investigations into financial fraud. These funds are fully authorized and legally protected under federal statute. His contributions directly aided multiple convictions. I read the words twice before my vision blurred. A weight lifted, a burden I hadn't known I was carrying. I pressed the page to my chest, whispering, "He did it right. All of it." Nora nodded. "Your husband helped us uncover crimes that might never have seen light. His integrity set a standard most people can't reach." Henry leaned back slightly, smiling. "He left more than wealth, Lillian. He left evidence of character." I glanced toward the shelves, the rows of ledgers, each one lined with the order of a man who saw fairness as a duty, not a choice. "He once told me faith should be written down," I murmured. "Now I understand why." Nora closed the folder. "The funds in Harbor Group LLC are cleared. They'll be transferred to your estate. And with the new evidence, the court has grounds to finalize the forfeiture of Emily's contested share." I took a slow breath. "Then it's settled." She hesitated. "There's one more thing. We recovered audio from yesterday's operation, her confession, Ryan's admission, every word. The case will move swiftly now. They'll both face sentencing, but with cooperation, Emily could receive counseling and rehabilitation instead of a full term." My eyes lingered on the sunlight spilling across the floor. Good. Mercy deserves a door, even in courtrooms. Nora nodded. "You've shown remarkable strength, Mrs. Graves. Most people fight for revenge. You fought for truth." After she left, Henry remained, watching me quietly as I wandered toward the fireplace. On the mantel stood a small carved box, its wood worn smooth from years of dusting. I opened it and found something I hadn't seen in years, a pocket knife, its handle engraved with initials, CEG. Along the edge, faint but still visible, were 3 small letters scratched by a child's hand. Mom. I traced the carving with my thumb, the letters soft against my skin. A memory surfaced. Emily, no more than 10, kneeling beside her father as he showed her how to carve initials into the old oak tree behind the house. She'd insisted on marking the knife too, so he'd never forget her when he worked late. He hadn't, and neither would I. Tears blurred my vision again, but they weren't bitter this time. They carried warmth, like spring rain after a long frost. I whispered into the quiet. He kept faith, in paper and in me. Henry's voice was gentle behind me. So what will you do now, Lillian? I turned toward him, the pocket knife still in my hand. What Charles taught me. Build something honest. He nodded. A foundation? I smiled softly. Exactly that. We spent the rest of the afternoon closing files, labeling boxes, and restoring order. As we worked, the house began to feel lighter, as though it too was breathing again. By evening, the last of the documents were sealed and stacked neatly on the desk. The sun dipped low, filling the room with amber light. I walked to the doorframe of the study, running my fingers along the edge. There, carved faintly into the wood, was a small heart. Beneath it, the same word as on the knife, Mom. My breath caught. The carving was old, the lines worn but visible, a message from a time when love had no conditions. I rested my forehead against the frame and let a quiet smile find me. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and roses through the open window. I closed my eyes and let the air fill my lungs. This was what legacy truly meant, not property or power, but proof of love that endured every test. When I finally turned off the light, the ledger lay closed on the desk, the DOJ letter resting beside it. The room no longer felt haunted. It felt whole. As I stepped into the hallway, I whispered into the fading glow. You kept your promise, Charles. Now it's my turn. And for the first time in months, I felt the house return the whisper through the creak of the floorboards, the sway of the curtains, and the echo of faith restored. 6 months later, the ocean stretched before me, blue, calm, endless. The winter winds had softened into a salt-sweet breeze, carrying the distant cry of gulls and the hush of waves folding onto sand. I stood at the edge of the terrace overlooking the water, my hands resting on the railing of what had once been a house of loss, now reborn into purpose. A modest brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight beside the front door. The Graves Foundation for Elder Dignity. It wasn't a mansion anymore. The marble floors had been replaced with warm oak, the cold hallways filled with light and laughter. Volunteers moved through the courtyard below, arranging tables for the opening reception. Banners fluttered in the wind, reading dignity, justice, renewal. Each word chosen, not for grandeur, but for truth. Henry joined me on the terrace, carrying a stack of documents, final approvals, press releases, the little pieces of paper that turned ideals into action. He smiled, handing me a pen. You're officially open, Lillian. The first program starts Monday. Legal literacy workshops for seniors. You've built something lasting. I signed my name carefully, then looked out toward the sea. Charles would have wanted this. He spent his life putting things in order. I think he'd like that his legacy does the same. He'd be proud, Henry said, not just of this place, but of how you got here. I nodded, remembering all the steps, the lock that clicked, the sealed envelope, the arrests, the revelations. Every wound had become a doorway, every silence a sentence written in truth. Any word on Emily? I asked quietly. Henry's expression softened. She accepted the plea agreement. Restitution, community service, counseling. No prison term. Relief settled over me like sunlight. Good, I whispered. She needed correction, not destruction. She's been attending therapy, Henry added. Her counselor says she's starting to see things clearly. Guilt, grief, gratitude. It's a long road, but she's walking it. I smiled faintly. That's all I ever wanted for her, to walk forward, not in circles. Below us, guests began to arrive. Neighbors, community leaders, former colleagues of Charles, who had once balanced ledgers beside him. Among them, I spotted Agent Nora Davis. She waved from the courtyard, her posture as composed as ever. "Will you say something today?" Henry asked. "I will," I said. "Not long, just enough." We made our way downstairs. Inside the main hall, sunlight poured through tall windows, catching on photographs lining the walls, images of volunteers helping elders review documents, write wills, reclaim homes. At the center, a framed motto read, "Justice doesn't shout, it stamps." When the time came, I stepped up to the small podium. The murmurs faded, replaced by an attentive hush. 6 months ago, I began, this house stood as a symbol of loss. But loss is only the first draft of redemption. My husband believed that dignity, once taken, can be restored. Not by anger, but by action. This foundation is his faith turned outward, and my promise turned forward. Faces in the crowd nodded, some smiling, others wiping at their eyes. "We're here," I continued, "to make sure no elder is ever silenced by fear or trapped by paperwork they don't understand. To remind them that their worth doesn't expire with age, and to show that even the quietest voices can leave echoes that last." Applause rose, gentle but heartfelt. I glanced toward Henry, who gave a small nod, then toward Agent Davis, who mouthed, "Well done." As the guests began to mingle, I slipped outside to the garden. The roses bloomed again, lush, open, forgiving. I knelt beside the fountain and placed a single white flower in the water. It drifted slowly across the surface, turning with the current like a compass pointing home. I spoke softly to the wind. "We can't change our children, Charles, but we can change the world they'll age into." From somewhere behind me came a familiar voice, smaller now, hesitant. "Mom?" I turned. Emily stood at the gate, a plain dress in soft blue, her hands clasped nervously before her. She looked different, not polished, but present. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded. "You already have." She crossed the garden slowly, her eyes taking in the plaque, the flowers, the people. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's honest," I replied. Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." I stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "You don't need to say it twice. I heard it the first time you asked to come in." She exhaled, shoulders trembling, then hugged me, tentatively at first, then tighter, as though holding onto something fragile, yet familiar. For the first time in years, I felt her heartbeat against mine, not in rhythm yet, but learning. We stood like that until the breeze lifted, carrying the scent of roses through the courtyard. The guests clapped in the distance, but here, in the quiet of the garden, there was only peace. I looked toward the horizon, where the sky met the sea, and whispered, "Some legacies live in ink, others in forgiveness." And as the flower floated toward the fountain's edge, I knew this chapter, ours, had finally turned toward the light. The morning light drifted gently through the wide windows of my art studio, settling across canvases and old wooden frames. The air smelled faintly of linseed oil and sea salt, the scent of a second life unfolding slowly, peacefully. Outside, the ocean shimmered with that familiar rhythm Charles used to call the sound of patience. It had been half a year since the foundation opened. The house no longer echoed with the hollow ache of absence. It breathed instead with purpose. Volunteers came and went, their laughter weaving through rooms once heavy with silence. Evenings now belonged to painting, soft strokes, muted tones, images of balance and light. On the desk beside me lay a sealed envelope addressed in Emily's handwriting. It had arrived the week before, forwarded through Henry's office. For days, I hadn't opened it. Some words need time to ripen before they're read. Today, I felt ready. I sliced the envelope gently and unfolded the letter inside. Mom, I've spent months trying to understand the difference between control and care. I used to believe they were the same. I wanted to protect what Dad built, but I ended up destroying what you taught me. The court gave me a sentence. Your grace gave me something harder, reflection. I'm rebuilding slowly. I volunteer now with families who've lost their homes. I'm learning how to listen. And every time I help someone fill out a form, I think of you at the kitchen table, patient as I stumbled through my math homework. You always said justice and love aren't opposites. They're partners. I didn't believe you. I do now. I finally understand why you never raised your voice. You didn't need to. The truth was louder. Thank you for standing still when I pushed. Thank you for holding the door open, even after I closed it. Emily's tears blurred the ink before I reached the end. I pressed the page against my heart, eyes closed, whispering a prayer for both of us. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm, learned one beat at a time. I set the letter down and turned toward the shelf. Among the brushes and jars sat an old voice recorder, worn smooth from years of Charles's use. I hadn't played it since before the arrests. A small yellow tag on its side read, "For Lil, if you're hearing this." With careful fingers, I pressed play. His voice filled the room, warm, steady, familiar. If you're hearing this, Lil, it means the plan worked. The envelope, the clause, the funds, it was all meant to protect you, not bind you. I know you'd rather mend than fight, but sometimes love requires a paper trail. I smiled through tears. I left you more than ledgers, he continued. I left you proof that truth can live in silence. You were always the wiser one, Lil. If faith ever wavers, look to what we built. Honesty, not wealth. That's the real inheritance. The message ended with a faint click, but his voice lingered, soft as breath. I set the recorder down gently. The studio seemed to glow in the silence that followed. A knock came at the door, light, tentative. "Come in," I said. The door creaked open, and a small face peeked through. My granddaughter, hair tied back with a ribbon, eyes bright with curiosity. "Grandma, can you teach me to paint today?" I smiled and beckoned her in. "Of course, sweetheart. What would you like to paint?" She thought for a moment, then pointed toward the open window. The door and the light. I followed her gaze. Outside, the garden door stood open, sunlight spilling across the floor in long golden stripes. It was the same door Emily once locked, now always left ajar. I gathered brushes and paints, placing them beside her on the easel. "All right," I said. "The door and the light. Let's start with the edges. They hold the story together." She dipped her brush into the yellow paint, her small hand steady in mine. "Grandma," she asked softly, "why is the door open?" so people can find their way back, I said. We painted together in the quiet, the colors blending into warmth. As the strokes took shape, I felt time fold gently around us, past and present, meeting in soft light. This was legacy, I thought, not estates or ledgers, but lessons carried forward in gentle hands. When the painting was nearly finished, I stepped back and looked at our work. A door half in shadow, half in sun. A child's brush had captured what law, paper, and time had all tried to define. That healing doesn't close what was broken. It lets the light through the cracks. I rinsed the brushes and placed them aside. "You did beautifully," I told her. She grinned. "Can we show Mom when she visits?" I smiled. "Yes, darling. I think she'd like that." Outside, the wind lifted, stirring the curtains, carrying with it the scent of roses from the garden below. I stood for a long moment, watching the door, the sea beyond, and the way the light touched everything without choosing sides. Somewhere, in the soft murmur of the waves, I could almost hear Charles's voice again. Faith in paper. Foresight in love. I whispered to the quiet room, "Because justice, my dear, has its own volume." The camera of memory panned outward, the studio bathed in sunlight, a child painting beside her grandmother, a door forever open. And beyond it all, the horizon, steady, forgiving, infinite.